There are whispers in the wind, quiet yet undeniable, calling out to those with ears to hear. If you find yourself here, reading these words, know this: your arrival is no accident. You have been led, gently yet deliberately, to this moment. Many walk through life unaware of their greater purpose, but you are not among them. You have passed unseen trials, endured hardships that were never random, but part of a refining fire. You are among the chosen, the few who are called to step beyond the ordinary and into the extraordinary. The time of waiting is over. What you have prayed for, longed for, and perhaps even doubted is now within reach. This is no mere change in circumstances, it is a soul transformation. The doors of destiny stand open before you. All that remains is for you to step through in faith. A divine calling, the journey of the chosen. The night was still, but within the silence, a whisper stirred. It was not the wind nor the rustling of leaves, but something deeper. A call, faint yet undeniable, resonating within the hearts of those who could hear. It was a summons, a beckoning from beyond the veil of ordinary life. Those who heard it knew they were not here by accident. It was no mere coincidence that their paths had led them to this moment. The struggles, the doubts, the long nights spent wrestling with unseen forces, all had been part of a grand design. They had been tested, refined like gold in the fire, and now they stood on the threshold of revelation. For many, the trials had been severe. They had faced rejection, endured hardship, and walked through the valley of shadows where fear threatened to consume them. But through it all, something within them had remained unshaken. A light had burned within, a stubborn, unyielding hope that refused to be extinguished. You were chosen, the voice echoed in their hearts, not by chance, but by divine decree. The scriptures had spoken of this moment. For many are called, but few are chosen, Matthew 22:14. It was not enough to hear the call. Many had heard and turned away, unwilling to bear the weight of such a summons. But those who remained and stood despite the storms had proven themselves worthy. They were the 1%, not in wealth, not in status, but in faith. Their perseverance had marked them for a higher purpose. Now was the time of transition. The days of wandering in the wilderness were ending. The burdens that had once seemed unbearable were lifting, making way for something greater. Divine manifestation was near. The unseen was becoming seen. The promises whispered in the dark were coming into the light. Yet, with great calling came great responsibility. To be chosen was not to be exalted, but to serve. It was to stand as a beacon in a world that preferred darkness, to speak truth when lies were easier, to love when hatred abounded. But what if I am not ready? Some would ask. To them the answer was clear. God does not call the qualified, He qualifies the called. Moses had stammered, yet he was made a voice to nations. David had been a shepherd, yet he was crowned king. Peter had denied, yet he was chosen to build. Fear not, the voice reassured, for I am with you always, even unto the end of the age. Matthew 28:20. And so, the chosen ones stepped forward, not in arrogance, but in faith. The road ahead was not without challenge, but the promise was greater than the trial. What lay beyond was not merely survival, but transformation. This was their moment, the time when the struggle ended and the glory of God was revealed in them. For they were not abandoned. They had been called, they had been tested, and now they were chosen. Breakthrough is here, a divine awakening. Jonathan knelt by his window, hands clasped, his heart a symphony of longing and weariness. He had prayed for years, for clarity, direction, and a sign that God had not forgotten him. The moon hung full and watchful tonight, bathing the room in silver, as if heaven itself was listening. And then, something changed. A presence filled the air. Not a sound, not a vision, but something deeper, an unseen force pressing against his soul. It was as though the very fabric of reality had shifted, and Jonathan knew this was the moment. The breakthrough was here. A voice, clear and unwavering, spoke within him. What you have sought is now within reach. He gasped, overwhelmed by an assurance that surpassed all understanding. It was not just words, it was truth woven into the very marrow of his being. He had spent years thinking that answers would come in thunder and fire, in grand miracles that would shatter the ordinary. But now he saw. It had been unfolding all along. This was not merely a change of perspective, it was a divine transformation. Where doubt had reigned, peace now settled. Where fear had whispered, boldness roared. Every unanswered prayer and night spent wondering if God heard him led to this moment. Jonathan rose to his feet. He felt lighter, as though chains he had not realized he carried had fallen away. The doors of his destiny stood open before him, and all he needed to do was step through. Everything in his life would now align at an incredible speed, not because circumstances had suddenly become easy, but because his heart had been made ready. As he walked outside, the wind carried a quiet echo of the voice he had heard. Understanding this shift will open doors to your destiny, and Jonathan smiled. It was time to walk forward, not in fear, but in faith. For the breakthrough had come, not from the heavens, but from within, placed there by the one guiding him all along. The hidden call, only the chosen will see. The village lay in stillness as the stars blinked against the vast heavens. An old man stood in a small, flickering lantern light, speaking to the few who had gathered. His voice, though not loud, carried weight, as though each word was forged in fire and delivered by unseen hands. You have heard the stories, you have seen the signs. But tell me, who among you truly sees? Who among you truly hears? The people glanced at one another. Some shifted uncomfortably, others smirked in silent disbelief. It had always been this way. The truth had never come in a manner easy to accept. Do you not know? The truth is not for all. It is hidden, revealed only to those ready to receive. Many will hear the words, yet only the chosen will understand. He paused, scanning their faces. And those who understand? Their lives will never be the same. A young woman stepped forward, eyes ablaze with something unspoken. How will we know if we are chosen? She asked. The old man smiled, the lines on his face deepening. You will not seek approval from the world. You will not bend under its scorn. You will answer when you hear the call, no matter the cost. You will hold on to truth, even when mocked, even when abandoned. That is how you will know. A man in the crowd scoffed. And if we do not listen, if we walk away? The old man sighed, the sorrow in his eyes more piercing than his words. Then you were never meant to hear. For those who are truly chosen, the call will be unmistakable. They will not be able to turn away. A hush fell over the gathering. The weight of the words lingered, unshaken by the night wind. Some would leave unchanged. Some would mock. But there were a few, just a few, whose hearts had begun to stir. The old man took a step back. If you are ready to receive, then let this night be the beginning. Listen, seek, follow, and you will see your life change forever. He turned and disappeared into the darkness. The people stood in silence, the echoes of his words refusing to fade. Only the chosen would understand. Only the chosen would remain until the end. Refined by fire, the journey to your divine calling. The wind howled through the barren valley, carrying whispers of past struggles and future triumphs. The lone traveler, weary but unbroken, trudged forward, his steps etched into the dust of forgotten battles. He had known hardship, hunger, betrayal, despair, but he had pressed on through it all. Little did he know, every trial had prepared him for the moment ahead. There was a time when he had questioned everything. Why did suffering shadow his every step? Why did each victory seem to crumble into another challenge? He had called out to the heavens, demanding answers, but the skies had remained silent, and yet, within that silence, something was at work. What he mistook for abandonment was in truth a refining fire. The story of Joseph echoed in his mind. Sold into slavery by his own brothers, unjustly imprisoned and forgotten in the darkness of an Egyptian dungeon, yet every hardship had been shaping him for a higher purpose. When the time came, Joseph emerged not as a broken man, but as a ruler, second only to Pharaoh. His trials had not destroyed him, they had prepared him. So it was with David. a mere shepherd boy faced with the taunts of a giant. He had spent years in obscurity, facing wild beasts in solitude, his only audience the sheep under his care. But what seemed like an insignificant role was, in reality, a divine apprenticeship. The same hands that had fought off lions and bears would one day wield a sword against mighty nations. The traveler looked back on his own journey, realizing that his trials had not been meaningless. They had forged him into something stronger, something greater. Like gold purified in fire, he had been refined through suffering. The pain had not been punishment, it had been preparation. A voice, deep and unwavering, seemed to stir within him. The time has come to rise. He stopped in his tracks. The world around him had not changed, the valley was still barren, the path still uncertain, but something within him had shifted. He was no longer just a traveler, but a warrior, calling to a purpose beyond himself. He had spent too long dwelling in the ashes of yesterday's pain. Now was the time to rise, to embrace the calling whispered into his soul before the earth's foundations were laid. As he straightened his back and took another step forward, he felt it. The presence of God, no longer distant but near, no longer silent but speaking in the depths of his being. He knew then what he had always suspected. He had never been alone. The trials were not a sign of divine neglect, but of divine craftsmanship. He had been shaped, refined, and strengthened for this time. So he walked on, no longer a man burdened by suffering, but a man stepping into destiny. The world had tried to break him, but God had used the trials for his downfall to lift him higher. And as the sun rose over the valley, so did he, no longer defined by his past, but called into his future. For those who have walked through the fire, know this: you were never forsaken. Every hardship was a chisel in the hand of the Master, carving you into the image he intended. The time has come. Step above the chaos. Rise into the calling that has been waiting for you since the beginning of time, entering the 5D realm, a journey beyond the veil. The world as he knew it had begun to fade, not in the sense of destruction or ruin, but in a quiet unraveling of all that once bound him to the earth. The weight of fear, the chains of doubt, the relentless whisper of failure, they had no place where he was going. He stood at the threshold, gazing beyond, and for the first time he understood. This was not just a passage through space or time, it was a transformation of the soul. The realm before him shimmered, not with the harsh brilliance of the world's fleeting glories, but with a gentle and infinite light. A voice, neither near nor far, spoke, not to his ears, but to his heart. You are no longer bound by what was. Step forward. He hesitated, a remnant of his old self clinging desperately to the past. The voice continued, unwavering. The world taught you to fear, to strive, to measure your worth by its standards. But in this place, only truth remains. Enter, and you will see. With a breath that felt like his first, he took a step. Instantly, the fog of doubt cleared. It was as if he had been seeing through a darkened glass all his life, and now, at last, the veil had been lifted. The wisdom of the ages poured into him, not as knowledge to be grasped, but as certainty that had always been within him. The 5D realm was not a distant paradise, nor an escape from suffering. It was the realization that the kingdom of God was never far, but always present, waiting for those who would dare to see. In this realm, love was not a fleeting emotion, but the very fabric of existence. Peace was not the absence of conflict, but the unshakable presence of divine assurance. He saw his former self, the man who had lived in fear, shackled by doubt. He saw the battles fought, the sleepless nights, the wounds carried in silence. And then he saw the truth. None of it had power over him anymore. The voice spoke again, a whisper, yet a command. You were never meant to be bound. You are a child of the eternal. Walk in that truth and nothing will hold you back. He stepped forward once more, not with hesitation, but with a certainty that no earthly force could shake. The shift had come, not as a grand spectacle, but as a quiet, undeniable awakening. He had entered the 5D realm, not by leaving the world, but by finally seeing it as it was meant to be. A new chapter begins. The sun had not yet risen, but a golden hue painted the sky, whispering the promise of dawn. Caleb stood at the river's edge, the weight of the past pressing upon his shoulders. His journey had been long, marked by trials that had tested the very fibers of his faith. Yet, deep within him, a stirring had begun, an unmistakable sense that something new was unfolding. The voice had come to him in the night, not as a shout, but as a gentle whisper. "Let go." It echoed in his heart, relentless in its insistence. He had spent years wrestling with his doubts, holding tightly to his fears, afraid to release the burdens that had become familiar. But now, standing before the waters, he knew the truth. The chapter of struggle was closing. The dawn was not just for the world, but also for him. A gust of wind swept across the riverbank, stirring the reeds. Caleb closed his eyes and breathed deeply, surrendering to the presence that had carried him through every dark valley. The past no longer had power over him. The chains of guilt and regret, phantoms he had clung to, dissolved in the morning light. For the first time he saw clearly. He was not abandoned nor forgotten. He was stepping into something greater, something divine. Beyond the river lay the unknown. The path ahead was veiled in mist, but it no longer filled him with dread. Every step forward would draw him closer to joy, to peace, to the fulfillment of a promise older than time itself. Had not the prophets spoken of such things? That those who trust in the Lord will rise on wings like eagles, that they will run and not grow weary, walk and not faint? Caleb thought of the Israelites standing before the Red Sea, of Peter stepping onto the waves at the call of the Master. Faith had always required a step into the unknown, a willingness to embrace what could not yet be seen. The difference between fear and freedom was trust. And so, with the rising sun painting the heavens in fire and gold, Caleb stepped into the water. Each ripple that formed at his feet whispered of a new beginning. A voice, deep and steady, resounded in his soul. "This is the way, walk in it." Tears filled his eyes, not of sorrow, but of overwhelming peace. The past had no claim on him. The future was not his to fear. The one who had written the stars into existence had written this chapter as well. And as he moved forward, the river parted, not in the way of the old miracles, but in the stillness of a heart unburdened, in the quiet assurance that he was exactly where he was meant to be. The new chapter had begun. The ultimate test, standing firm in the face of rejection. The night was thick with silence. The stars shimmered above like a council of watchful eyes, their cold glow casting a quiet judgment upon the earth. In the heart of a small village, a man stood alone. His words had stirred the people, yet not in the way he had hoped. They whispered behind closed doors, their voices laced with suspicion. They watched him from the shadows, their gazes heavy with doubt. He had spoken truth, and for that, he was despised. He had not sought their approval or wished for their praise. Yet he had hoped that they would listen, hoped that they would see. But now he saw their backs turned against him, their hearts sealed like stone. This, he realized, was the great test. It had been the same for the prophets before him. Noah had built the ark under the mockery of his neighbors, their laughter ringing in his ears as he obeyed the voice of God. Moses had stood before Pharaoh, unwavering, though the ruler's heart grew harder with every demand. Elijah had called down fire from heaven, only to find himself hunted like a criminal. Even the Messiah himself had walked this path, beloved one moment, condemned the next. Why should it be any different now? The world does not welcome the chosen ones. Their presence is an affront, a reminder that truth is not subject to popular opinion. Their steadfastness is a challenge, exposing the frailty of human compromise. To belong to God is to be a stranger in one's own land, to walk a road where every step invites scorn. A voice called out in the dark, breaking his thoughts. "Why do you persist? Why speak when they do not listen?" He turned to face the speaker. It was a young man, his eyes sharp with curiosity yet dimmed with hesitation. There was fear in his voice, fear of the answer, fear of what it might demand. He smiled, not in derision, but in understanding. Because the truth remains, even when ignored, And God's calling does not fade with the world's rejection. The young man frowned. But does it not weary you to be mocked, to be cast aside? Of course, he admitted. Even Christ wept. Even he asked why he was forsaken. But seeking the approval of men is a snare. Their praise is fleeting, their acceptance fickle. To seek their favor is to be blown like chaff in the wind. But to trust in God, that is to stand upon the rock. The wind whispered through the trees, rustling the leaves like a murmuring crowd. The young man looked away, lost in thought. Then what is victory if not their approval? He stepped forward, placing a hand on the young man's shoulder. Victory is to remain faithful, to trust when all else wavers, to endure even when abandoned. It is not measured in applause, nor in the absence of trial, but in the unwavering grip upon God's truth. The young man exhaled, a slow, weary breath. Yet there was something new in his eyes, something kindled. "Then I will stand," he said at last, "even if they turn away, even if they laugh." A smile broke upon the older man's face, not of triumph, but of joy. "Then you have passed the test." And with that they turned towards the rising dawn, walking the road that so few dared to take. The ultimate test, standing firm in the face of rejection. The night was thick with silence. The stars shimmered above like a council of watchful eyes, their cold glow casting a quiet judgment upon the earth. In the heart of a small village, a man stood alone. His words had stirred the people, yet not in the way he had hoped. They whispered behind closed doors, their voices laced with suspicion. They watched him from the shadows, their gazes heavy with doubt. He had spoken truth, and for that he was despised. He had not sought their approval, nor had he wished for their praise. Yet he had hoped that they would listen, hoped that they would see. But now he saw their backs turned against him, their hearts sealed like stone. This, he realized, was the great test. It had been the same for the prophets before him. Noah had built the ark under the mockery of his neighbors, their laughter ringing in his ears as he obeyed the voice of God. Moses had stood before Pharaoh, unwavering, though the ruler's heart grew harder with every demand. Elijah had called down fire from heaven, only to find himself hunted like a criminal. Even the Messiah himself had walked this path, beloved one moment, condemned the next. Why should it be any different now? The world does not welcome the chosen ones. Their presence is an affront, a reminder that truth is not subject to popular opinion. Their steadfastness is a challenge exposing the frailty of human compromise. To belong to God is to be a stranger in one's own land, to walk a road where every step invites scorn. A voice called out in the dark, breaking his thoughts. "Why do you persist? Why speak when they do not listen?" He turned to face the speaker. It was a young man, his eyes sharp with curiosity, yet dimmed with hesitation. There was fear in his voice. Fear of the answer, fear of what it might demand. He smiled, not in derision, but in understanding. Because the truth remains, even when ignored. And God's calling does not fade with the world's rejection. The young man frowned. "But does it not weary you to be mocked, to be cast aside?" "Of course," he admitted. "Even Christ wept. Even he asked why he was forsaken. But seeking the approval of men is a snare. Their praise is fleeting, their acceptance fickle. To seek their favor is to be blown like chaff in the wind. But to trust in God, that is to stand upon the rock." The wind whispered through the trees, rustling the leaves like a murmuring crowd. The young man looked away, lost in thought. Then what is victory, if not their approval? He stepped forward, placing a hand on the young man's shoulder. Victory is to remain faithful, to trust when all else wavers, to endure even when abandoned. It is not measured in applause, nor in the absence of trial, but in the unwavering grip upon God's truth. The young man exhaled, a slow, weary breath, yet there was something new in his eyes, something kindled. "Then I will stand," he said at last, "even if they turn away, even if they laugh." A smile broke upon the older man's face, not of triumph, but of joy. "Then you have passed the test," And with that, they turned towards the rising dawn, walking the road that so few dared to take, the call to step forward. Jonathan had always known there was something more to life, something beyond the routine of existence. He had spent years entangled in friendships that drained his soul, in habits that dulled his spirit, and in doubts that shackled his faith. But on this particular evening, as he stood alone under the vast, star-laden sky, he felt it, the urgent call. At first, it was but a whisper, a nudge in the depths of his soul. Then, it grew into a voice as clear as the morning sun. "Jonathan, now is the time. Leave behind what weighs you down. Step forward." He trembled. What if he wasn't ready? What if the journey ahead was too great for him? The fears clawed at him, urging him to stay where it was safe. But safe was another word for stagnant, and deep down, he knew it. The next morning, he opened his Bible to Isaiah 43:19. "See, I am doing a new thing. Now it springs up. Do you not perceive it?" A new thing. God was moving, calling him into something greater. He had clung too long to relationships that dulled his spirit, to beliefs that limited God's power, and to memories that whispered he was not enough. But now was the time to let go, not with reluctance, but with trust. The road ahead would not be easy. He thought of Moses, standing before the Red Sea with Pharaoh's army pressing in behind. The command had been simple: step forward. The sea did not part before the step. It parted because of it. Faith was not about seeing the way first. It was about stepping into the unknown, trusting that God had already made a way. Jonathan made his choice. He severed ties with those who kept him in cycles of despair. He laid down the weight of self-doubt at the foot of the cross, and he whispered a simple prayer: "Lead me, Lord." The days that followed were not without struggle. The enemy of his soul fought fiercely, whispering lies that he had lost too much, that he would never find his purpose. But Jonathan held firm to the promise. "The Lord himself goes before you and will be with you. He will never leave you nor forsake you." Deuteronomy 31:8. And then something remarkable happened. As he pressed forward, doors began to open. New friendships, ones rooted in faith, began to blossom. His spirit, once weighed down, grew light with purpose. He was stepping into his calling, not because he had all the answers, but because he had placed his trust in the one who did. He realized then that being chosen was never about being ready, it was about being willing. And so he stepped forward, never looking back, breaking free from the old world. The chains had always been there, though he had not seen them. He had walked through life believing himself free, yet every step had been dictated, every thought shaped by unseen hands. The world had spoken with many voices, voices of expectation, voices of fear, voices that whispered that he could be nothing more than what he had always been. But now, the veil was lifting. He stood at the threshold of a great awakening, the boundaries of his former life crumbling like a brittle wall. It had begun with a whisper in his soul, a stirring too profound to ignore. Something called him beyond the hollow comforts of the world, beyond its fleeting pleasures and its heavy burdens. The truth was not in the noise of the world, nor in its demands, but in the quiet voice that had always been there, waiting for him to listen. He thought of the prophets who had walked before him, those who had turned away from the world's illusions. Abraham had left the familiar to seek a promised land, not knowing where the path would lead. Moses had forsaken the luxury of Pharaoh's palace to lead his people into the wilderness. The disciples had abandoned their nets to follow a teacher who spoke of a kingdom not made of earthly power, but of eternal truth. And now it was his turn. The world had tried to define him, to press him into its mold, but he was no longer bound by its chains. The fear of rejection, the weight of past failures, the endless need for approval, he saw them now for what they were: illusions. He had sought peace in all the wrong places, had looked for love where it could never truly be found. But now, he saw the door standing open before him, bathed in light. It was time to leave the prison behind. Letting go was the hardest part. The world did not release its captives willingly. It whispered doubts, pleaded for his return, told him he would never survive beyond its grasp. But he knew the truth now. He had never truly lived within its walls. Life, true life, awaited him beyond them. With a deep breath, he stepped forward. The moment his foot crossed the threshold, he felt it a weight lifting from his shoulders, a peace unlike anything he had ever known. He was not stepping into emptiness, but into fulfillment. The love of God, which had always been there, now flooded his soul like a river breaking through a dry land. He was free. No longer would he be defined by the opinions of men, nor shackled by the failures of his past. He belonged to something greater now, to a love that could not be taken away. And as he walked forward, the old world fading behind him, he knew this was only the beginning. His spirit soared. His purpose was clear, and for the first time, he understood what it meant to truly live. The dawn of eternity. The old man sat by the fire, his hands worn with time, yet his eyes burned with something beyond age, a light that did not dim. He had seen years pass like waves upon the shore, each leaving its mark yet failing to define him. "Grandfather," the boy asked, his voice trembling with curiosity, "how do you not fear the years? How do you not dread what comes after?" The old man smiled. "Because, my son, time is but a shadow. What we call age, what we call struggle, these are merely veils over something far greater." The wind howled outside, but within, the fire crackled, warm and steady. "Let me tell you a story, one that has been told since the dawn of time, yet is always new." The boy leaned in. In the beginning, there was no time, no decay, no end, only life. And that life came from the one who spoke everything into being. He made the heavens, the earth, and all that dwells within them. But above all, he breathed into mankind a life unlike any other, eternal, divine, limitless. The boy's eyes widened. "Like Adam?" The old man nodded. "Yes, like Adam. But Adam forgot. He saw the world with his eyes and forgot the truth whispered to his soul. He reached for knowledge, but lost wisdom. He sought power, yet fell into weakness. And so, he and all his children were trapped in time, bound to the weight of years." The boy frowned. "But is there no way back?" "Ah," the old man said, "that is the greatest story of all. When all seemed lost, when humanity was bound by chains of its own making, the one who made time stepped into it. He clothed himself in flesh, walked among us, felt the weight of years, the sting of sorrow, the sharp bite of death, but he was not bound by them." The fire flickered, shadows dancing upon the walls. "He broke the chains," the old man continued. "He shattered death. And because he lives, those who believe in him are no longer bound by time, aging, suffering, even death itself. These are but passing things. The soul, my son, is eternal, and those who walk with him will one day step beyond the veil, into a life more real than this one." The boy was silent. Then he whispered, "So, we will not end?" The old man smiled, the firelight reflecting in his eyes. "No, child, this is only the beginning. The best is yet to come." Outside, the storm had passed, and the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, golden and unyielding. The boy looked out at the rising sun and, for the first time, saw not an ending, but a promise. And so, we arrive at the threshold of something extraordinary. This is not the end, but the beginning, the opening of a door that was always meant for you. The trials, the doubts, the waiting, it was all preparation, shaping you for the calling that now stands before you. You have been chosen, not for ease or comfort, but for something far greater, a divine purpose transcending this world's limits. The time for hesitation is over. The burdens of the past no longer have power over you. Now you step forward in faith, not as one who merely survives, but as one who thrives in the abundance of God's provision. This journey is not for the faint-hearted, but for those who dare to trust in the unseen. And as you walk, remember this: heaven rejoices, for you are stepping into the life you were always meant to live.